The NTSB preliminary report is out on the New York helicopter's Bell 206 crash in the Hudson River last April 10th. There's nothing much new in this preliminary report, but what's more important is what's not in this report. Let's get into it. My name's Juan Brown, you're watching the BLANCOLIRIO channel, and we're going to get into some details that you probably won't find on any of these other channels that are covering this disaster. So the NTSB report covers that which we already know, but here's an important detail. Right prior to the crash, the helicopter was at a geometric altitude between 625 and 650 feet, and the helicopter's altitude increased to 675 feet MSL before it entered a rapid descent. And some sharp BLANCOLIRIO viewers noted the difference in altitude in the video where the helicopter emerges from behind this building. They noticed a difference between the altitude where what level floor the helicopter was at when it first came behind this building versus when it came out from behind this building. So that indicates that last little 25 feet of altitude, and we'll get into that, why that's important here later. Meanwhile, they explain the details in the fuzzy, grainy video here, where the beginning of the failure, the fuselage yaws severely with simultaneous tail boom failure. Secondly, the tail boom separates from the helicopter, but the main rotor assembly and mast are still in with the fuselage. And then the third sequence of events is that the main rotor blades, along with the entire transmission and roof structure to the helicopter, fully separates from the fuselage. An interesting detail here that the photos of the pilot taken before the helicopter departed indicated that he was wearing computer-augmented sunglasses, which had video and audio recording capability, and the sunglasses, unfortunately, were not recovered. Had that pilot had a recorded evidence of this crash, this would have helped investigators out tremendously. So it sounds like the pilot of the helicopter was building time. He had a total of 790 hours, 48.6 hours, which were in the same make and model as the accident helicopter. The pilot worked a schedule of 10 days on, 10 days off. This was his first day after being back from a 10 days off. The accident flight was the 8th tour flight of the day for the accident helicopter, and all those flights were operated by the same pilot. So it was his 8th flight of the day on his first day back from after 10 days of leave. So the helicopter has been inspected on a progressive basis. Instead of doing an annual inspection, you do progressive inspections and break up the maintenance over a period of time to minimize the downtime of the helicopter. The event 2 of a progressive 300-hour inspection and 100-hour inspection was conducted on February 27th of 2025. At that time, the airframe had 12,975 hours, pretty high time airframe, and the engine had accrued 23,305 hours of operation. Now remember, turbine engines last a lot longer than recip engines. And remember too, these are total times, not times since major overhaul. At the time of the accident, the helicopter had operated about 50 hours since the last inspection. There was some wind out there at the time of the accident. Winds 150 at 10, gusting to 18. Variable winds 120 to 190. Good visibility, but a peak wind of 36 knots was recorded at 1423. And then a few more details about the aircraft and the weather. What they're not saying in here is they're not saying anything about a transmission failure at this point. Had there been some sort of a problem with the transmission, they would have known that by now, and the word wouldn't have been out, and more than likely, an emergency airworthiness AD would have been in the works. But there's no mention of any problem with the transmission at this point. Of course, no mention of mast bumping, because that's not what we're talking about here. But what's not indicated in this report is what model of rotor blades was this helicopter using. And just a couple days ago, there was this airworthiness concern sheet put out by the FAA just back on the 6th of May regarding in-flight abnormal vertical vibrations. Because while investigators are studying this Hudson crash, they've also got this incident from back in September of 24, 206L Long Ranger helicopter. Everybody survived on this one. This was in Fern Prairie, Washington. According to the pilot, he had departed a remote landing zone and was en route to fly to Boring, Oregon. While in cruise flight about 1,000 feet above the ground, the helicopter experienced a severe vertical hop and began to shake violently. The pilot initiated an emergency descent, during which time the shaking subsided. The pilot performed a normal landing in an open field. After egressing, the pilot observed substantial damage to the helicopter's tail boom. And as we look at the NTSB B-roll footage of November 216 Mike Hotel, the accident helicopter in the Hudson, the first thing we see is the failed tail boom. It's not failed at the attach point here, it's failed at the next bulkhead or next row of rivets back, or about 12 to 15 inches back from the main attach point. And according to the sequence of photographs that we saw there in the preliminary report, this was the first point of failure of the airframe. But what caused this initial failure? You see that row of rivets right at that bulkhead there? Right there. And here is the attach point. This is not caused by a rotor strike. Because of concern to investigators right now is that it sounds to me like both of these helicopters involved were operating with Van Horn rotor blades. Van Horn composite rotor blades, which are an aftermarket rotor blade for the Bell 206, because the original stock aluminum honeycomb rotor blade systems are virtually impossible to get from Bell helicopters. Pretty much your only choice nowadays to keep these helicopters in the air is to use these Van Horn blades. But they're a different type of blade. They're a different type of construction using composite construction. And their concern is, are these blades setting up some sort of a frequency vibration that they didn't catch during the flight testing of these blades that is potentially causing this vertical hopping of the helicopter? Let's go back and look at that concern report. Now, back on the airworthiness concern sheet that just came out a couple days ago, the FAA has received reports of severe vertical vibrations on Bell 206L helicopters. These events are inconsistent in their repeatability. In addition, post-flight inspections have not identified any failure that caused the vibration event. Reports indicate that the vibration subsides once additional load is applied on the main rotor by increasing the collective. So if you pull back on the collective and you put a load on that rotor, once it starts hopping on you, you can dampen this vibration. But remember, a helicopter has a very minimal amount of negative G capability. It's like 1/2 of a positive G. You've got to keep positive G on the rotor system. Now, we're not talking about mast bumping. We're talking about this vertical hop. And this vertical hop can vibrate several other components. For example, the vibration may worsen with low friction set on the collective. If you don't have the friction lock on the collective set tight, that collective will start bouncing on you, and then the whole thing starts shaking like crazy. The FAA is aware of at least one event where continued vibration resulted in substantial damage to the helicopter's tail boom, and that's the Fern, Washington report we just referenced. But the aircraft was able to land safely. This also explains, in the preliminary report for the Hudson Bay helicopter, why the helicopter potentially may have initially climbed that last 25 or so feet, the pilot making an effort to try to dampen this vibration by pulling a little positive collective may have caused the helicopter to climb slightly before everything fell to pieces, if he was unable to stop this vertical hopping vibration. The NTSB is investigating the event, which was assigned this number. The preliminary report has been released. So this number, LA319, this references the Fern Prairie helicopter incident where the pilot was able to safely land the aircraft. Now they're wondering about the Hudson deal, if it's related. So if any of you out there has suffered this vertical vibration or has any experience with this, get a hold of the FAA and let them know all this detail about the configuration of the aircraft, the flight conditions, and any other details you can add to it, because this may very well affect an emergency airworthiness directive on these aircraft to prevent future crashes like what just happened last April there on the Hudson. Thank you so much for your support of this channel, especially the folks over on Patreon that make this content possible. See you here.